Okay, so as Dave said, tonight we're going to have a high-level overview of scoring, ranking, and rotational strategies in AmiBroker. We originally started out just thinking we were going to talk about rotational strategies, and I realized that we needed to make sure that we were clear on a few things before we dove into that. So, like Dave, I have a disclaimer that says don't take anything that you see tonight as investment advice. You can lose money trading, et cetera, et cetera. I'm sure you guys are already well aware of all those things. Our agenda. This is the same list that you just saw on Dave's screen a minute ago. So we're going to talk about, like I said, terminology, scoring versus ranking. And then we'll dive into each one of those a little bit. What scoring is and why we use it, what ranking is and why we use it. And then we're going to talk some about AmiBroker rotational strategies, what we can do, what we can't do, things like that. And then we'll spend just a little bit of time at the end talking about things that you might want to do that AmiBroker rotational mode does not support. I should have checked with all of you to make sure that everybody can hear me. So if I could just get a few confirmation yeses that people are hearing my voice right now. Okay, great. All right, so let's get into it. So scoring versus ranking. The reason that I wanted to dive into this a little bit was that a lot of people use these terms interchangeably, and it's reasonable for people to use them interchangeably because they address very similar concepts. But in strict AmiBroker parlance, a score is a value that has an independent meaning in and of itself. So in other words, if we all take a math test and Dave gets a 98 and I get a 93. 98 is Dave's score and 93 is my score. It doesn't tell us anything about where we ranked in the class. It just tells us what how many things we got correct versus how many things we got incorrect on our math test. In the world of trading, a score could be the value of an indicator. It could be some combination of indicators that you use, or it could be the result of some other unique calculation that's not necessarily indicator-based. So for example, we could use the 5-day rate of change as a score for each of our symbols. And we'll talk a little bit more about how scores are used in AmiBroker in a minute. In contrast, a rank is an ordinal number, meaning first, second, third, etc., that communicates relative position of the underlying value within the population. So typically we are ranking, the population that we're ranking within is our trading universe. Generally that would be your watch list, but it could be any other universe as well. So in the example that I gave before, Dave got a 98, I got a 93. Turns out that somebody else got a 99 and 3 people got a 95. So that would make Dave's rank second, and my rank would be 6th, right? So the way AmiBroker does ranking, each symbol that we rank has a different value or different rank for every bar in the backtest. So it's not just that Apple is number 1 and Microsoft is number 2. It's, oh, Apple is number 1 on Monday, and Microsoft is number 1 on Tuesday, and IBM is number 1 on Wednesday, etc. What we don't know from just the ranks are what the underlying values are. So if we can say, yes, Apple is number 1 today, but we have no idea, even if we know what the underlying ranking metric was, we don't know what the actual Apple value was just from the rank. We lose that information. Of course, we can keep track of both if we need them. All right, just one quick note. Throughout this presentation, I use the terms days and bars interchangeably because I mostly test on end-of-day data. But just keep in mind that if you are doing a back test or an exploration on a periodicity other than daily, in other words, if you're using weekly or 15-minute or 1 minute, then obviously you need to distinguish between bars and days. All right, so a little bit more about scoring. AmiBroker has a built-in variable called position score. And position score is used very specifically to determine the order of trade entries. So when we generate buy signals, or no, I put buy or cover, I should have said buy or short signals, AmiBroker will rank our trades based on our position score. The position score variable has no effect on scale-ins, scale-outs, or exits. And then the other important point about position score is that AmiBroker always looks at the absolute value of a position score. So if your symbol has a position score of -4, it will be entered before something with a position score of +3. And that's important to note, because if you're using an indicator that has both positive and negative values, for example, ROC, or rate of change, you want to make sure that you get all the values positive and that they will be ordered in the direction that you want. So in other words, if we want to give the most priority to things that have the highest ROC5 value, we might take our ROC5 value and add 10,000, which means that something that has a 3% rate of change would have a position score of 10,003, and something that has a rate of change of -4% will have a position score value of 9,996. If we wanted to rank them the other way and we wanted things with a low ROC to have the most priority, then we would take 10,000 minus the ROC value, right? Because then the negative ROC values would be above 10,000 and positive would be below. All of this is only relevant when there are more entries than you can reasonably take on a given day or a given bar. So when I say that more than you can reasonably take, that might mean you have more setups than you have potential max open positions. So I only allow 5 open positions in my strategy. I have 20 setups for today. I want to take the 5 best setups, not some random 5 from within. Another way that I can be limited is by the amount of capital that I have. So maybe I allow myself 5 open positions, but I'm using risk-based position sizing, and my positions can occasionally get very large if my volatility is low. I may only have 3 positions open, but they're already consuming 99% of my equity. I can maybe squeeze in 1 more trade, maybe not, but I certainly cannot squeeze in 2 more trades. So again, my position scoring will help me decide which trade I'm going to take on a given day. Finally, it should be noted that if you are testing on intraday bars, so let's say 5-minute bars, again, position score is by default AmiBroker behavior is that position score is only going to break ties or prioritize trades on a specific bar. So let's assume for a second that I'm entering on a limit order tomorrow, and I have 20 setups. I can only take 5 trades. I only allow 5 open positions. If 2 things actually meet the limit price at 9:30 New York time tomorrow morning, I'm going to take those 2 trades. There is not a 30-way contention for trades at 9:30 in the morning. There's only 2-way contention for the 2 trades that are actually filled. Again, unless we take special measures to say, oh no, we need to consider all 30, and we only want to consider the top 5 within that 30 for the entire day. But just keep in mind that that's the way position scoring works by default, is that it's there to prioritize trades on a specific bar. All right, sometimes you need to shift your position score. And we just talked about a case where we might be considering limit orders on Wednesday based on trade setups that happened on Tuesday night. We would obviously want to rank our trades based on the Tuesday value, the Tuesday position score, not based on a Wednesday value, especially an end of day Wednesday value. because that would be looking into the future, and it would be information that you couldn't possibly have when you were live trading on Wednesday. So the rule is, if AmiBroker is managing your next day entries, for example, because you're using set trade delays, then AmiBroker will keep the position score aligned with the entry signal. And by entry signal, I mean either your buy signal or your short signal. So you don't have to worry about shifting it. If you're managing your own next day entries or intraday signals, for example, with limit orders, then you need to make sure that you shift your position score by one place, one day, one bar, whatever, so that you're using the Tuesday night position score to rank trades on Wednesday. Does that make sense to everybody? Because that's an important point, because it's a really easy place to accidentally introduce a future leak. All right, so I've got a couple yeses and no nos, so that's good. All right, so that's position scoring. And it really has just that one and only one function within AmiBroker, which is to prioritize my entry signals. So now let's talk about ranking. Some of the reasons that we might want to use ranking, one would be, let's assume that maybe you only want to take the 50 most volatile stocks in the S&P 500. Well, in order to know if something is in the top 50, obviously we need to have a sorted list so you can look at ranks 1 through 50 and rule out the others. Another reason that you might want to use ranking is if you're doing some sort of weighting calculations, especially those that might involve indicators that operate on a different scale, on different scales. So let's say that I want to have some sort of a weight assigned to each one of my symbols. And that weight is a combination of RSI, which operates on a scale of 0 to 100, and historical volatility, which theoretically could go to 0, but realistically is probably somewhere in the high single or low double digits, and can theoretically go to infinity. But practically, again, historical volatility might range from 10 to 300. We can't just add or multiply or whatever RSI and historical volatility, because we'll get very strange results. So if we really want to, if our goal, for example, is to find the stocks today that have the lowest RSI and also the lowest historical volatility, a good way to do that would be to rank both of those values and say, okay, well, we can combine the two ranks so that something that has #1 rank for RSI and a #1 rank for historical volatility might have a combined rank of 2. Let's say we're going to take a simple approach and just add them in an unweighted way. Now we have a combined weight or a combined rank of 2 for the symbol that has the lowest RSI and lowest historical volatility. Obviously, it would be a little unusual if a single symbol was both the lowest RSI and lowest historical volatility, but a rank, say, of 1 for RSI and 3 of historical volatility would beat something with an RSI rank of 5 and a historical volatility of 1, right? So you get the concept, is that we're trying to find a way to join unlike features or unlike indicator values. The way that we do ranking in AmiBroker, which is, ranking is basically a big sort. And as I said at the beginning, it's not just a sort of all the symbols against each other. It's a sort of all the symbols against each other on every single bar. So there's a lot of sorting to do. The way that we do this in AmiBroker is for every symbol that's going to be ranked, let's say that it's every symbol in the S&P 500. We're going to create a static variable that holds the value to be ranked. So if we're ranking on RSI, we're going to create a static variable with a name like Apple RSI. Apple being, I'm sorry, it's going to be the other way around. It's going to be RSI Apple. So the indicator name and then the symbol name. And the reason that they need to be named in that very specific fashion is so that later on when we tell AmiBroker to find them all, it can find all the static variables that start with a specific substring that we've told it to recognize. So we create this static variable for every symbol in our watch list or our universe or our index, whatever the case may be. And then for every bar, AmiBroker is going to sort all of those ranking values, let's say all those RSI values, for all the static variables that match the naming convention. And we'll see an example of this in a minute. My next slide is looking at some AFL code that does this. The highest ranking value is assigned a rank of 1. The next highest has a rank of 2, etc. So that means if I wanted to rank, say from low, if I want to give the best rank to the lowest RSI, I would have to store a value like 100 minus RSI so that I get all of those reversed, because otherwise AmiBroker is going to give rank number 1 to something that has an RSI of 100. AmiBroker does have 2 modes. It has 1, 2, 2, 4 mode, which means that if 2 symbols have the same ranking value on the same bar, then they both get the same rank. So if Apple and Microsoft both have an RSI of 60 today, and Apple has a rank of 12, then Microsoft will also have a rank of 12. You can also use 1, 2, 3, 4 mode, which says that Apple and Microsoft will be given different ranks, although you don't know whether Apple will be 12 and Microsoft will be 13 or vice versa. You just get what you get. But in either case, if let's say Facebook has the next lowest RSI, and that's a value of 57, in either case, Facebook is going to have a rank of 14. So whether Apple and Microsoft both take 12, or one takes 12 and one takes 13, the next rank is still going to be 14. So in other words, the rank is basically one more than how many symbols are ahead of you in the ranking. So if you're ranked number 5, it means there are 4 other symbols ahead of you in the ranking order. Make sense? Okay, no disagreement. I'm going to take that as a yes. So let's look at a bit of code. All right, so I know that this is a little bit small. I was trying to get it all onto one slide so that we could kind of grasp the whole concept. But in this example, we're going to rank by RSI 2. So the first if block there, those of you that have been in some of my other classes, you should recognize that. The most notable part of that is the first clause of the if that says if status stock num equals 0, which is our way of finding out that we're on the very first symbol of, we're on phase 1 of the very first symbol. So no other symbols have been loaded into AmiBroker yet, nor have they executed their phase 1 AFL. So this is our chance to do one-time initialization that's going to be in effect for everybody else's phase 1 code and the phase 2 code as well. And the reason that we want to do that is if we need to use our ranking value, say as part of our entry, our example earlier was, well, maybe we want to identify the top 50 elements, symbols in the S&P 500. If we're going to use that as part of our setup condition, then obviously we need to have done the ranking before any symbol gets around to generating its setup condition. So this is the way that we do that. The second, third clauses there that say status action X is not equal to action portfolio and status action X is not equal to action X AA parameters. That says, hey, by the way, if I'm already on phase 2, please don't bother to do the ranking again. One thing about ranking is because we're going to loop through every symbol in our watch list, which for the S&P 500 might be 500 symbols, but if we're really looking at all the symbols that have ever been part of the S&P 500 for the last 20 years, might be a couple thousand symbols. So we have to process every one of those symbols, and then AmiBroker has to sort on every single bar that's part of our back test. So if it's a 20-year back test, that might be 5,000 plus bars of data that it has to sort. So it's got a lot of work to do. We don't want to do this more often than we have to. So the second and third clauses say, don't do this if we're already on phase 2, the work's been done. And also don't do it when I call up the parameters window. And that's, you don't have to have that there, but if you don't have that third clause, what will happen is if you do use parameters, you'll go and click on the parameters button in AmiBroker, and then there'll be this pause from a few seconds to possibly a minute or more, depending on how complex your ranking is, while AmiBroker goes out and does all the ranking just so that it can show you the parameters window and you don't care about your ranking values anyway. So that's why I rule out those two other conditions. All right, so inside that if block, we've now said, okay, great. We're on phase 1. We're not on phase 2 yet. We're not pulling up our parameters. Chances are good we're doing an exploration or a backtest. Great. The first thing we want to do is clean out any existing variables. So you'll see that I do a static var remove on everything starting with RSI2 and also everything starting with rank RSI2. And you'll see in a minute that we're going to start populating those variables again. The next line where it says symlist equals category get symbols, blah, blah, blah. That line of code basically says, go out and figure out what my included watch list is. So in other words, when I said apply to filter and pick the watch list, go out and get that guy, and then get all of the symbols as a column separated list and put it into symlist. It should be noted that that get option, filter include watch list, will only work if obviously you're running your analysis against a watch list. And furthermore, only if you're running against a single watch list. If you've selected 2 watch lists in your apply to filter window, AmiBroker is just going to take the first one. And it's probably going to give you snotty error messages saying, well, you know, you can't get both of them if you've selected 2 watch lists and try to use this, it's not going to work. So just keep in mind that this particular logic will only work if you have a single watch list selected. So we get the list of symbols from the watch list. We put that into a variable called symlist. And then we have our for loop, which uses string extract to take out one symbol at a time, and it keeps going until it gets to the end of the list. In other words, until string extract returns an empty string. So that's what the for loop does. Inside the for loop, we've got a little trace statement there. You'll see that that's kind of in my typical format where I say if do trace, which is a variable that I set at the top of my AFL so that I can turn off tracing when I'm not using it, because again, tracing will slow down your code. And the trace statement just says, hey, I'm setting ranking information for this symbol, and it tells me what TK-sim is currently set to. So that's a way that I can go back and do some debugging and see what's going on if my loop is getting hung up or if the values aren't right or whatever. I'm then going to do a set foreign on TK-sim, so that tells AmiBroker, hey, I know you think that you know what the current symbol is right now. It's whatever stock num 0 is, but I want you to set the default symbol to something else. So my open, high, low, and close are all set to whatever symbol is in TK-sim, and I can use functions like RSI that don't take parameters, that don't take price parameters. Now RSI actually happens to have an RSI-A variation where I can pass some other price other than the default close price of the current symbol. But if you're using other indicators, for example, ATR or ADX or things like that, you're going to have the current symbol set. So set foreign is the standard way to do that. So we calculate our RSI2 on whatever the first symbol is. And then the next thing that we want to do is see if this is a value that we really want to rank. Our original goal was find the top 50 symbols based on some criteria, which is RSI2 in this case, in the S&P 500. So given that our S&P 500 current and past watch list in Norgate, if you're using Norgate data, is a few thousand symbols, on each day, so let's say we're starting on January 1st, 2000. On January 1st, 2000, we don't want to rank all let's say it's 3,000 symbols. I don't know how many it is actually. I think it's less than that. We only want to rank the 500 that are part of the S&P 500 on January 1st, 2000. So what we're going to do is we're going to go out and ask Norgate. We're going to call Norgate index constituent time series on the index name, which is $SPX for the S&P 500. You'll see that's defined right at the very top of the screen. And we're going to ask Norgate, okay, is the current symbol, which was set by set foreign, in the S&P 500, and give me back an array called inIndex, which is true on all the days that this symbol was in the index, and it's false on all the days that it was not. So for example, if our current symbol were Facebook, for all the dates before sometime in the middle of 2012 when Facebook started trading, that value is going to be false. And for all of the values from that date in 2012 through the present, inIndex is going to be true. And then finally, we get to our static var set, which is going to be RSI2 plus the symbol name. So that's the name of our static variable. And then that second clause there says, if inIndex is true, in other words, if this symbol is in the index on any given day, set our static variable to 100 minus RSI2. In other words, we're trying to prioritize the stocks that have the lowest RSI value. Otherwise, if this symbol is not in the index, use a very large negative number so that we don't need to worry about it. Right? This is not scoring, so we're not looking at absolute value. Ranking, using static var generate ranks, always just looks from highest value to lowest value. So by using a very low negative value, we're guaranteeing that this symbol would end up at the end of the ranking order for the days that it's not in the index. All right, so that's the end of our for loop. So in brief summary, what we've done here is we've said we're going to find all the symbols in our watch list. We're going to process each one of those symbols. And for every symbol, we're going to create a static variable that has the ranking value. In other words, the 100 minus the RSI2 value in a static variable. When we're done with that loop, we get down to those last two lines where it says now actually do the ranking. And that calls static var generate ranks. And that's a built-in AmiBroker function. It's been around for a few generations now. And we pass it a couple things. The first thing we pass it is a string that says, AmiBroker, how are you going to name the static variables that hold the ranks? And we've told AmiBroker, I want you to start those static variables with rank. Next string, RSI2, is what tells AmiBroker, how do you go out and find all the static variables that I just created that have the values which will be ranked? And we just created a whole bunch of static variables that started with RSI2. RSI2 Apple, RSI2 Microsoft, RSI2 Facebook, et cetera, all the way through the S&P 500. And then the final parameter in the static var generate ranks is the 1224, which means we're using the version of ranking where if two things have the same underlying value, then they will also get the same rank. And then finally, that final curly brace gets us out of the hole if this is the first stock in the backtest, if status stock them equals 0. So you put this in at the top of your code, and when we hit our first symbol, we do all the ranking for all, several thousand symbols that are in the S&P 500 historical watch list. So great. Now, what do we do with that? So let's assume that we want to use that ranking value in our entry logic. And in this case, I just went directly to a buy. I didn't mess around with the setup. So in order to get the rank back for the current symbol, we're going to use a static var get. And the variable name that we're going to get is rank RSI2 and then the symbol name. Right, and the rank RSI2 comes from what we told AmiBroker. I'm going to go back a slide. In this last line, we told AmiBroker, when you generate ranks, I want you to start everything with the word rank, and then my variable started with RSI2, so AmiBroker uses that also, and then the symbol name, right? So those have to match. When we tell AmiBroker static var generate ranks with rank and RSI2, then when we go to retrieve our value with a static var get, we're going to use rank RSI2 and the symbol name, which is what the name function returns, right? So RSI2 rank now contains numbers between 1 and 500, and then, well, actually it'll be at least, if there are really 500 things in the S&P 500, then the ranks will go to at least 501, because everybody who wasn't in the S&P 500 will have the rank of 501, right? Right now, I think there are a few more than 500 things in the S&P 500 because, for example, we have both Goog and Google in the S&P 500. So don't be surprised if you see ranks a little bit higher or lower than 500. So RSI2 rank goes out and gets those values, and again, that's an array. So on January 1st, 2000, Apple will have one rank. On January 2nd, it'll have a different rank. On January 3rd, it'll have yet a different rank, or maybe not. Maybe it'll keep its rank for several times in a row, but it could potentially be different on every single bar. Next line, I see that I have a typo. So what I meant to do there was go out and get my RSI2 value, but what I did is I retrieved the same variable name again. I will fix that before I send the slides out. But we stored all of our RSI2 or 100 minus RSI2 values in a static variable. Those static variables are all still around so that if we want to go back out and retrieve them, we can do that. Sometimes it's faster to retrieve the static variable than it is to recalculate the value that you use to rank on. And then finally, in our by statement, we're going to have, any number of additional rules there, but one of our rules is going to be that the RSI2 rank has to be less than 50. Right, so now we've achieved our goal of saying we're only going to trade the 50 stocks in the S&P 500, or the top approximately 10% most of the time, the top 50 stocks that have the lowest RSI values. Dave asked, can you speed up code in a rotational strategy using ranking by only ranking if your date is the proper trading date or the day before the trading date? So number one, we don't need to use ranking for a rotational strategy. We need to use scoring, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute. If you do choose to use ranking, and basically you would have to assign your rank back to your score and make sure that things get ordered correctly, right? Because ranking, the most preferential rank is 1, and everything that wasn't in the S&P 500 is going to have a rank of, say, 501. If we blindly assigned our rank back to our position score, it would be exactly the opposite of what we wanted, because AmiBroker would say, oh, look, there's all these things with a position score of 501. Those must be the things that I most want to trade right now, right? And the thing that has a position score of 1, which was the rank of 1, it will say, oh, that's a really bad position score. We'll never get down to that one, right? So be careful mixing ranking and scoring. To answer your question, Dave, I don't know that there's really any speed difference, because AmiBroker doesn't have any way to know ahead of time that let's say we're only trading on the 1st of the month. So you might only put in ranking values for the 1st of the month. AmiBroker has no way of knowing in advance that the second of the month, 3rd of the month, 4th of the month, etc., that every symbol has the same non-rankable value. Let's use that 1e to the -9, -1e to the -9. AmiBroker doesn't know that, so it's still going to have to look at every one. Now the sort will go a little bit faster, because the first time through whatever the sort routine is, it's going to go, oh look, everything's already in sorted order, because they all have this same huge negative value, or they all have 0, or whatever you use their So it might speed things up a little bit, but I don't know how much. I mean, AmiBroker is pretty fast with stuff like that because Tomas takes a lot of pride in optimizing his code for exactly those types of scenarios. All right, so now we've talked about scoring, we've talked about ranking. Let's move on and talk a little bit about AmiBroker rotational strategies. So first, let's make sure we're all on the same page about what a rotational strategy is. So my definition of a rotational strategy, and I think this is consistent with AmiBroker's definition, is rotational strategies are strategies that enter and exit on a periodic basis. So could be daily. More often it's either weekly, monthly, quarterly, or annually, right? So I only trade on the first day of every month or the last day of every week. Usually, not always, but usually a rotational strategy is fully invested in whatever the n best trading instruments are based on the position scoring, right? So the basic idea behind a rotational strategy is I have $10,000 worth of equity. I want to split that evenly between whatever the 5 best instruments are for me to be trading right now. So I'm going to put $2,000 into each of 5 different symbols, and the 5 that I pick are going to be based on my scoring. And then finally, rotational strategies usually only exit a position. In other words, a symbol only leaves the rotation if they're forced out by something with a higher rank or a higher score, right? So if I say, well, right now my 5 symbols are Apple, Microsoft, Facebook, Amazon, and Google, then I'm only going to kick Google out when something else comes along that has a higher score, or possibly when it may not even be that something has a higher score. It might be that Google has to fall below some predefined ranking within the rank of scores. All right, so AmiBroker's rotational mode. You can tell AmiBroker that you're going to run a rotational mode test by either using set backtest mode, backtest rotational. If you just put a semicolon at the end of that, that's AmiBroker code. You can also call enable rotational trading. They do exactly the same thing. The documentation says that enable rotational trading is now obsolete and you should use set backtest mode, backtest rotational instead. But it really doesn't matter which one you decide to use. Nothing that is marked as obsolete has ever actually stopped working in AmiBroker as far as I know. AmiBroker rotational mode uses only the position score to rank and rotate securities. So all of the bullet points that you see there are copied directly out of the AmiBroker help file. And I'll just go through them real quickly. So a higher positive position score means it's a better candidate for entering a long trade. A lower negative score means it's a better candidate for entering a short trade. So notice that that's a little bit different from scoring in general with AmiBroker, that it's always absolute value. You can use it to differentiate between long and short. A position score of 0 means that you don't want to trade that symbol on that bar, and that if there's already an open position in that symbol, that it should be exited immediately. You can also set your position score equal to a constant named score no rotate, which means that basically all of the trades that are currently open are going to stay open. And you'll see the 2 little asterisks there. We'll get to that in just a second. There's another predefined constant, score exit all, which causes the rotational mode backtester to exit all the open positions, regardless of any other settings. It just says, get out now. For both of these, it's important to note that if any symbol has their position score set to one of those values, it affects the entire rotation. So it doesn't just have to be a symbol that currently has an open position. If some random symbol within your S&P 500 has the position score exit all, Doesn't matter what anybody else's position score is set to, AmiBroker is going to exit all your positions. And that's what the two asterisks are for on the second to last bullet point, and that's explained in the very last bullet point. All right, continuing on with how AmiBroker does its rotational mode. Exits are generated automatically when any securities rank drops below the worst rank held. And again, we can see where people start to interchange the use of score and rank. So even within the AmiBroker documentation, Tomaz says your entries will be controlled by your position score. By the way, the ranking of the position score is what can kick you out of the rotation. So if you specify worst rank held as 15, that means that to get into the rotation, you have to be in the top 5. For example, in our previous example where we said we only have 5, our max open positions is set to 5. AmiBroker says, great, 5 open positions, 20% of equity each. On the first trading day, I will take the 5 best things from the S&P 500. In other words, the 5, well, we haven't really talked about what the scoring is. We only talked about ranking to narrow us down from 500 to 50. But I'll take the 5 best. On the second rotation, if our worst rank held is set to 15, AmiBroker won't kick anything out of the rotation unless it's got a rank of 16 or greater, right? So we might not have the top 5 anymore. We might have numbers 1, 2, 3, 12, and 14, but they're all still above 15, so AmiBroker is going to keep them all in the rotation. When one of those falls below 15, AmiBroker will exit that position and take the top ranked symbol that's not already in the rotation. So let's say that our number 14 goes to 16 on the next rotation. That one gets kicked out. 1, 2, and 3 still hold those ranks of 1, 2, and 3. So AmiBroker would say, oh, number 4 is the highest ranked thing that's not currently in the rotation. Let's enter a new position on number 4. And then finally, all of your entry and exit signals, so buy, sell, short, and cover, all the prices, buy price, sell price, short price, and cover price, are not used if you're using AmiBroker's built-in rotational model. And again, I'm quoting from the AmiBroker help file. The rotational trading mode uses buy price and buy delay from the settings trade page as the trade price and delay for both entries and exits on both the long and the short side. So that's a little counterintuitive that whatever I set as my buy price in the settings window is going to be in effect for my entry of long trades. It's going to be the price that's used for my exit of long trades. It's going to be there for my entry of my short trades and my exit of short trades. So let's assume, for example, that you're doing something a little crazy and you always want to enter your long trades on the close and your short trades on the open. You can't do that with AmiBroker's built-in rotational mode. You have to use the buy price and buy delay. You can't set those from within your AFL the way you would probably normally think to do it. AmiBroker is going to use the values from the settings, not anything you set in the AFL. So clearly there are some limitations to using AmiBroker's rotational mode. So looking beyond AmiBroker's rotational mode, here are some things that are not supported. We just talked about one, which is what if you wanted to have different prices for long and short entries, for example, or if you wanted to have prices that were somehow different than open, high, low, close that you can set in the parameters window or in the settings window. All of that, again, would be kind of unusual. We can't have any sort of indicator-based entries or exits at periodic intervals. Some people think of that as a rotational strategy. Oh, yeah, I only trade on Fridays, but I enter on a limit order. I look for my setups on Friday, and I enter on a limit order on Monday. and I take whichever trades meet the limit, and it might be 5, it might be 3, I just don't know. That's not a rotational strategy. That's just a periodic, regular old indicator-based strategy. Exits on non-rotation days. So let's say there's some other condition where we don't want to exit all symbols, but we want to exit specific symbols for some other condition. Maybe something falls out of the S&P 500 and we don't want to hold it anymore. That's something that's not easily handled by the built-in rotational mode. Rebalancing, which is a big one for a lot of people with rotational mode. If you have a rotational model that tends to hold on to symbols for a long time, and let's keep using our working model of 5 positions at 20% of equity each. So we get into these 5 positions and we hold them for the first month, and then we hold 4 of them for the second month, and we hold those same 4 again for the third month. Well, some of them might be doing better than others. So now instead of having a nice 20% in each symbol, we might have 35% in one symbol and 18% in another, etc. And a lot of people, when they do rotational strategies, would prefer that every month or on some other periodic basis, we say, well, we're going to take that 35% position and we're going to scale out of it so we get back down to 20. And we're going to take that 18% position and we're going to scale into that one to bring it back up to 20, so that I know that at the beginning of each month, or whatever my rotation frequency is, that all of my positions are back to being the same size. Another way to think about that sort of exercise is it's profit taking, right? Because the symbol that's now up to 35% of equity has most likely grown, right? It's done really well. If our overall equity has stayed more or less the same, and Apple is now 35% of my equity, it means Apple's been going up in price. So by bringing it back down to 20% of equity, I'm selling off some Apple at a good price and taking some of my profits. Likewise, if Microsoft is now only 18% of my equity, it means Microsoft has been underperforming. I'm scaling in. I'm basically buying more Microsoft at a better price, or what some people would call averaging in, if you're more like in the mutual fund world and things like that. So both of those operations can make some sense, and it's also nice to know that your overall portfolio is well balanced the way that you had originally envisioned it. You can't do that with AmiBroker's built-in rotational mode, so you have 2 choices. One is that you can just exit all your positions and re-enter on every rotation day if you're writing your own code, right? And so that means that every time I re-enter and tell AmiBroker, hey, enter a new position with 20% of equity, I'll automatically be rebalanced. There are 2 downsides to that. One is that I'm going to generate extra commission costs, and the other is that I won't have any idea from my backtest report how long on average I really held positions. Because if let's say Apple stays in my rotation from January through June, that should have shown up as 6 months worth, or about 126 days of hold time. But if I'm selling it and rebuying it at the beginning of every month, then my average hold time for everything is probably going to be right around 21 trading days, right? So you lose a little bit by that buy and sell, buy and sell, buy and sell approach. But it's much easier to code than my other go-to solution. As you know by now, my solution for everything is write it in a custom backtest. So it's not that hard to write a function that you can use in your custom backtest routine to say, hey, on the rotation day or on some other periodic basis, go out and look at all the positions, and the ones that are too big, scale out of those. And the ones that are too small, scale into those. Another thing that doesn't work so well in AmiBroker's built-in rotational mode is having multiple symbol pools. So what if I have, let's take an example of the good old stocks and bonds 60-40 portfolio, but I want to rotate through the best stocks and the best bonds for any given month. So I want to have one pool that's the S&P 500 stocks to pick from for my 60% part of my portfolio, and then I want to have a smaller set of bond ETFs that I can choose from for the 40% of my portfolio. AmiBroker's built-in rotational mode has no idea how to do that. So again, if you want to do that, you're back to writing your own code in a non-rotational mode. Likewise with some types of long-short strategies. We saw earlier that you can rank your symbols so that there are long entries and short entries, so AmiBroker can handle some amount of that, but depending on what your rules are and how you want those longs and shorts to be balanced and things like that, you may very quickly find yourself beyond what AmiBroker can handle. As always, the question is, as soon as you start coloring outside the lines, you have to ask yourself, okay, so this doesn't seem to be working with AmiBroker's built-in rotational mode. Which is my better strategy? Should I work for a while longer and try to force AmiBroker to do what I want in rotational mode because it already does most of what I want? If I could just make it do this one more thing, I'd be golden. You can do that, but you might end up spending 30 minutes or 3 hours only to find yourself at a dead end and have to take another route anyway. Or you can give up more or less immediately and say, yep, not in the documentation, can't find anything about it on the forum. I'm just going to bag rotational mode and write my own test that's a rotational type test, but where I have more control over what's going on. So that's always going to be a balancing act. And with that,